name's Ed Lofts, and I'd like to welcome you to the first episode of the Real Work podcast. I specifically chose this name because we're going to be dealing with topics physical, mental, emotional, and financial, and the barriers which stop us moving our lives forwards and progressing. So physical barriers could be health and well-being, actual physical fitness, your ability to move around and navigate your environment. We've got mental barriers, which could be your mindset. It could be your education, it could be your viewpoint or the narrative of the story that you're telling yourself about your situations. So we're going to be going through how to change these type of things. Emotional barriers like trauma, grief, loss, all different ways of actually dealing with our emotions, learning how to regulate our nervous system so we can better suit ourselves through our behaviours. And then we're going to go to financial. We're going to be having guests on that are going to be talking people through how to save money, how to even get a job, how to interview properly. So we're going to be solving problems with practical actions that you can take yourself, which will better your life and those of the people around you as well. So to start off with today, we've got Tim Fletcher, which is my very first guest. We've got a lineup of a few guests over the next few months, which is going to be really interesting as well. But we're starting off with Tim, who I admire massively. I contacted Tim through YouTube. I did his course, which is called the Lift program, which is online, timfletcher.ca. He's from Canada. We flew him all the way over for a seminar on the podcast. Absolutely amazing information. What I'm going to do at the end of every podcast is I'm going to add on a 5-minute clip of my reflections from that podcast. So what I got out of it and how it's changed my mindset and the way I look at myself. Because if I'm not doing that, then I'm not developing myself. Sit tight, and I hope you get some really good, valuable information that helps better your life and those around you as well. Take care. I'm going to start off with the first question. So we obviously discovered through our athletes that complex trauma was affecting many, many people in different ways. We've explained the 60 characteristics of complex trauma. We've got people who've got quite a good understanding of the effects, the negative effects it has on us. And what we're trying to discuss next is the way that complex trauma can be overcome and the recovery process. Obviously, I've been through that myself, so I've got a bit of an understanding of it, but we've got yourself here today to talk about that. From your perspective, can you run us through a few of the key points that so people know that they are in a recovery process? And what are maybe the white flags that are being waved along the way to keep them on the path so they can identify there is a pathway and they're traveling along it successfully?
Yep. So I think, to me, like, we got to look at 3 different pieces that are part of understanding the recovery. So the first is, we often think of recovery in terms of the medical model. And the medical model is typically a linear, straight line. So you have a problem, you get diagnosed, then they have a treatment, a surgery, a medication, therapy, and then within 10, 12 weeks, you're pretty much over it. And so that's what a lot of people think is going to happen when they deal with their trauma. It's going to be a straight line, simple diagnosis, here's what you do, and you're fixed. The trauma recovery model doesn't follow the medical model, and that's so important to understand. And so the trauma model has 3 key pieces. So you can't heal from trauma unless you feel safe. That's part 1. So trauma took place where you're not safe, and so you had to use survival tools. And so if you try to recover when you're not safe, you're just going to keep using the survival tools. You're not going to be able to use new healthy tools because you're still in survival mode. So safety becomes the first priority for a person to get on the road to recovery. And so that usually starts with a therapist, one person, but it needs to grow into kind of a surrogate family. The second piece is, once the person is safe, then it's called the reprocessing of trauma. And that's been misunderstood because a lot of people think it means that you're just going to take people back into their trauma so that they somehow just rehash it. And that's as if there's value in just rehashing it. And they go, what's the point of just taking people back into pain? Aren't you going to just re-traumatize them? And it's really, no, reprocessing is not spinning your wheels, just rehashing. It is now going with support and tools so that you can now heal from the trauma, learn from the trauma, and it's not a paralyzing negative thing now, it becomes a healing positive thing. But what happens as soon as you start to reprocess, you bring up memories and you don't feel safe again.
Yep.
And so you got to go back to reestablishing safety. Then you can process, but then you hit the next memory, you don't feel safe. So you're bouncing back and forth to reestablishing safety, reprocessing. Once you've done that for a while, you've started to get a bunch of healing under your belt. And then you go to the third phase, which is beginning to move on with life. So it's really realizing that often in the early stages, that safety reprocessing, you got to be able to focus a lot of time to your recovery. But you get to a point where you've healed enough that you can go back to starting to engage in life again. But the problem with that is you start to engage in life, you meet people that trigger you, and then you got to go back to reestablish safety. It brings up memories, then you got to reprocess. So you're going back, forth, back, forth. So it's slow, it's up and down, it's back and forth, it's messy. And so typically the trauma journey, for most, the initial 3 months is the most intense. 3 to 6 months. But then as you start to re-engage in life, you have intense times that come out of getting triggered, but life starts to have a new, more enjoyable. You're using new tools. You're seeing positive results. It's very good. So that's the first piece, is the trauma model versus the medical model. The next piece is, what are the components of this recovery journey? And so there has to be an education, which is intellectual, where you're learning about trauma, you're learning how it affected you, you're growing in self-awareness. But then there's a second piece, and that is you have to connect with people. You can't heal from trauma just in isolation. You can heal a little bit, but your wounds came from connection issues. And you have to re-establish healthy, secure attachment. It's such a key part of recovery, and it's, a lot of people have resistance around that because I just give me tools, give me information, and I'll heal all by myself. And it doesn't work that way. And so you need that, which means you need safe people, a group that is safe, that you can start to open up to, learn to trust, and begin to process with them. And so much healing comes in that. But that's often where people resist the most. Then that becomes kind of a surrogate family, a support group that walks with you in the journey. They get you, they're going through similar things, and so you're healing together, and you're helping each other, and that becomes an important part of the journey. And then there's that therapy piece where you're reestablishing, reprocessing the trauma, healing, learning from it. So those are the components of what you're needing. But it's so important. There's an intellectual piece, there's a connection piece, but then for many, you got to go into the emotional world. You can't just heal it with information. You got to start processing emotions. And there's resistance that people have around that, because emotions have been all negative. They've never been able to resolve them. And so they go, what's the point of going into emotions? That's just going to be pain, pain, pain. So that becomes kind of the components that are necessary in the journey. Okay, the third part is the key kind of mile markers that you're making progress. So the first is when people start to be able to feel emotions, talk about emotions, cry. That's scary, but that's such an important part, because they're moving out of their head down into this foreign territory that is all new to them. So that to me is significant. The second one that's really significant for people is that the shame is beginning to heal. And so usually it's they're able to start standing up for themselves, expressing their needs, saying no to people, setting boundaries, taking time for themselves, self-compassion, self-care. So when I see people starting to do that stuff, that is a key marker on the road that they're making progress. The next one for many people is starting to identify the thousands of lies that they've been living by that they don't even realize. So that's an intellectual piece that they're starting to understand. They believe lies about themselves. They believe lies about relationships. They believe lies about how life works. So when they're able to start catching those lies and replacing them with the truth, that becomes a real breakthrough time for them. And then I would say the fourth key marker is when they begin to realize that often the main war in recovery is in their own brain, between their limbic brain and their cortex brain. And their limbic brain is that emotional part. And when it gets triggered, their thinking gets distorted. That's when the lies come out. And so when they develop the ability to get to their cortex and think truth, that is huge. But that leads to the next key piece, and that's developing tools to regulate their emotions. And that's often at the very beginning for most people as some of the very first tools they need to learn. Because if they can't regulate their emotions, they can't get to their cortex. They can't identify the lies. And so there's all kinds of different techniques for learning to regulate your emotions, from activities, breathing, thinking, talking to people. But that regulating of emotions is a key piece in the first 3 months, especially. And those are often very introductory, important tools if they're going to make progress down the road.
Yeah. So something that right from the beginning, where you said the safety piece at the beginning. So if we go back over that, a lot of people believe that their safe space is their home.
Right.
So then they say, well, I am safe. I'm going to hide at home and I'm going to isolate. But we're not talking about what feels normal.
Right.
So there's a big difference between what feels normal and what is actually safe, because often a real safety feels awkward for the people that are not used to it, and love feels difficult and awkward to sit in. So can you give us any hints towards or clues towards what does a safe environment actually look like?
Yep. So if I can just say this first. So what you were saying, a lot of people's safety is isolation, which means no connections, because connections are dangerous. Connections are what got me hurt. But the problem with that is usually they can't even connect with themselves. And they're actually, because of their shame, they're actually dangerous to themselves because they got this internal critic that's always putting themselves down, that is hard on themselves, judging themselves all the time. They constantly calling themselves an imposter, all kinds of things. So they're not even safe within their own head because they're their own worst enemy, bottom line. And so safety, true safety, is safety with connection. There has to be that connection. And that's where people, how can you get that? And so finding safe people. And so people basically who accept you for who you are and let you be authentic. They're not judging you. They're not always criticizing you, correcting you, putting you down. So there's a respect. They value you. They appreciate you. There's a positive atmosphere where they focus mainly on encouraging you, building you up, not putting you down or tearing you down. Then you have to be able to trust and build trust, because if you can't trust somebody, they're not safe. So that acceptance, that they validate you, that you can trust them, those become very important. Key to it really is that you're able to be authentic, and then you're able to be open up and be vulnerable without being judged or condemned, or they're not just trying to fix you. They're not just trying to make you what they want you to be. They let you grow at your pace, etc. Um, so the key thing I think for people when they get in the recovery journey is they want to find that person and identify them in one day. And it's like, it's not possible. You got to gradually get to know a person and trust them a little bit and see if they prove to be trustworthy. And if they do, trust them a bit more. And gradually you say, okay, this is a safe person. So you start with a certain amount of caution, and that's okay. That doesn't mean you're not trusting. It just means you're being wise. But you gradually get to know them and go through experiences, and then that sense of safety and trust builds. Um, and that's the goal.
So what type of tactics do people use if somebody in a family is trying to go and find safe people and they're looking to, like, I don't like the term better ourselves, because we're actually healing something,
right?
That it's not that there's anything wrong with us at all, but the family members that I've experienced through my own family, and also which I've observed from other people through helping them through these type of journeys, that you get like a pushback, don't you, from them, and they say things like, oh, well, you're trying to go and better yourself, which means you think you're better than us. Exactly. You think we're not good enough already.
Exactly.
But what would you say to people that are trying to go and do things like that? How do you manage the pushback? How do you deal with the family members and all the behaviours that come along with this?
So I think it's important to say to people, expect pushback. That's just the reality. So how I like to explain it to people is, most families, kind of without even realizing it, have this box that they live in, and the box is their values, their beliefs about life, their rules about how we relate, how we act, all of those things. And a lot of it's never talked about. Everybody just figures it out. And it could be lots of healthy stuff, but there could be unhealthy stuff. But it's just the way we do things. This is how our family operates. So when you step out of that box and go, that part's unhealthy, then they go, you're judging us, you think you're better than us. And so what they're basically doing is, rather than look at ourselves, let's find something wrong with you so that we don't have to change. And so if we can make you feel guilty and make you feel like you're being an egotistical narcissist, then you're going to come back into the box. And that's the goal, is we want to keep everybody in the box, because then everybody's happy, supposedly. But when you step outside of the box, then you're stirring up and pointing out problems, and that's creating conflict. And we just want to go back to peace at any price, which means deny the problems in the box. And so it's so important for people to, in recovery, and I talk about this with the shame markers of healing, is when they can set boundaries with family. And it's the hardest people. And you always get pushback. So you're stepping outside the box. You're saying, hey, that's not healthy. You treat me with disrespect. You're always criticizing me. I'm not going to tolerate that anymore. And they get mad at you. You think you're better than us, but you stick to your boundary that if you want a relationship with me, you got to treat me with respect. And that's such an important part of growth, is that boundaries in relationships with family. And it's one of the hardest parts for many people, because they have this sense of, I need this loyalty to my family. I can't go against them. I need them. And so what many people try to do is try to change their family, and often they get even more pushback. And so it's sometimes realizing my family's not going to change. And that's where some people go, if I keep growing, I might lose my family. And some people go, well, I guess I'll stop growing because I don't want to lose my family. Whereas others go, no, I'm going to keep growing. So I guess I got to create a surrogate family. And I can still have a relationship with my family, but it's never going to be super close like I hope it would be.
So my experience with this, I had some pushback. I've had comments where a family member said to me things like, what have you done wasting your whole life jumping around in pajamas? And I'm like, well, actually I enjoy jumping around in what you would class as my pajamas. I love it. It's my life's passion, and I've been doing the right things. But through that, I've learned to be able to do lots of other things. So uh, my actual expertise was transferable skills to other fields, and it all started with paying attention, and then that's really served me very well going through the process of healing trauma, because I was able to make connections with people, but also connections within myself about past situations, because you can spot them quicker
Yep.
if you have greater self-awareness. I'm not saying that I have greater self-awareness, but that was part of my practice through the martial arts. So with the pushback and the defensive strategies that people are doing, what I found is once you come out the other side of it, and like I now class healing, the healing process that I've gone through as a practice. So what I had a martial arts practice, which was physical, mental, and emotional, but I had only a quarter of the emotional box open. I was only able to deal with the surface of it. Once I unpacked the other emotions that were deeper down, I started to get physically stronger. My adrenaline went back to being used for what it should be, so I get the energy push from it. I can manage my heart rate higher than it has ever been before. I'm getting PBs with my running times and fitness levels and things. So that's been amazing. But the byproduct of this is the people around me can't help but notice.
Exactly.
And then they want a piece of the magic pie,
Exactly.
kind of thing.
Exactly.
So I think leading by example is
Yes.
a really good way. But have you got any experience with that, where the time scales that takes for people to start noticing things? Is
Yeah.
it different for all families?
Yeah, I would say it's different. I think it's important to pretty well everybody, once they start to learn about complex trauma and start to feel and experience the healing themselves and see the changes in their life, the first people they want to take the news to is get their family to, hey, you should go through this course, you should do this. And often they get the pushback and the resistance. And so what I tell people is stop talking, just live it. Live it out, and they're watching you and they're noticing that you're changing. And over time, some of them are going to say, hey, tell me more about what's been going on. And so you advertise not by words but by actions, and you just live it. So, but it's so hard to predict the time that's going to take, that you're going to have to live before anybody asks you about it. Some will never change, but often there will be some who are going to come and ask you about it. And so you need the key thing to me with the whole trauma recovery and then impacting others is you need patience, patience, patience at every level, because families aren't about to be wanting to change if they've been doing something for years, just because you all of a sudden got some new wonderful idea about what everybody should do.
Yeah. Something that I thought of whilst you were saying that was, if you find something shiny which is exciting and you want to take it to the people that you love, but quite often the people you love are the ones that hurt you in these ways, and because of their shame that they have and their emotional suppression and the mask they wear, and not being able to live the authentic version of themselves through their traumas and things like this, when you go to them, look at this shiny mirror that's going to help us and it's great, they're straight away you're saying this is helpful, but what they're hearing is you're not good enough as you are.
Exactly.
Whereas that's what we've got to get across, I think, is that it's not that people aren't good enough as they are. It's things have happened to them that they're still carrying, like a big backpack full of rocks, kind of thing. But the communication gets crossed like a paradox when you're talking through trauma to somebody else. Messages that you're sending them can be completely misinterpreted and skewed through cognitive distortions, I suppose.
Exactly.
So if that's the first bit, we've got the safety part discussed, and we've moved on to the connection. So once we find a place of safety and we start to notice, hold on, there are parts missing, the 12 human needs that we've talked about before, we say, well, if I start to meet these needs, I suddenly have this desire for connection. that one of the questions I've had quite a lot on the social media pages which I run is people saying, well, I'm an introvert.
Right.
And in actual fact, a lot of people that have gone through the healing process find out they're an extrovert who was in fear. There's definitely obviously introverts and extroverts out there, but can you give us a bit of an explanation of when people heal from their traumas? We've had people talk about my ADHD symptoms dissipated quite a lot. I was told my whole life I had autistic tendencies and they've gone away. So yeah, can you speak a little bit on those subjects?
Okay. So first, I would say about introvert, extrovert. So one of the things that happens is a lot of introverts become even more introverted. So like super shy, loners, etc. But some they learn to fawn. So they learn to act like extroverts. They act like the life of the party because they think their introversion is a curse and they think that extroversion is a positive thing. Whereas a lot of extroverts, if they've shut down early, they become what looks like introverts. And so a lot of people, part of the healing journey is discovering who they are and finding out they're quite different than they thought they were. But with introverts, so introverts and extroverts both need connection. Introverts just don't need as many people to connect to, but they still need connection with some. And so it's wrong to think that introverts don't need connection at all. No, they do. They just need it with only a few people. So that becomes such an important piece because there's a lot of misunderstanding that comes around that. So to me, it's so important that Dr. Gabamate and Bruce Perry and the research that's coming out is that a lot of stuff that would be called a mental health disorder, it really is, they look at kinds of behaviors and emotional things that characterize certain people and they see it in a bunch of different people and they say, oh, that's a disorder. What's coming out is that that actually is trauma symptoms. And so depression, anxiety, much ADHD, autistic stuff, they're starting to realize this is trauma working itself out. And so we've seen so many people with depression, anxiety, ADHD tendencies, as they start to deal with their trauma, they calm down, their nervous system is healing, their emotions are beginning to find a proper expression, and they're getting tools to manage all of that. And so they're starting to see huge improvements in all of those areas. And so I think there's still tons of research that's just going to bring out more and more understanding, but it's realizing that a lot of the stuff that we would kind of diagnose as you've got kind of this mental health illness, and we pathologize it almost as you got a negative sickness beyond your control, you just need a pill. Now we're going, no, this is coming out of trauma and we can deal with the trauma, and it's going to definitely help with all of those.
That's where, so in terms of like the polyvagal theory, if so many people are walking around in a spinal sympathetic state and they're not really regulated, their body is reacting to dangers in the environment, it's reacting to their own emotions, to their negative cyclical thoughts. And if they can get themselves into a ventral vagal state where they calm down, the ADHD, so we're not saying that ADHD isn't real. That's really important that we're not saying that. So we're saying that the symptoms will be much higher and heightened if they're not feeling safe in the first place within their own nervous system. So like I definitely have some brain fog some days and different bits if I'm tired and things like that, but they're generally able to be fixed by having a proper rest and refocusing yourself. But if you think that you've got ADHD or you're struggling, or people are telling you that you've got these things, like I was told my entire life that I was dyslexic growing up, and it wasn't. It's that I couldn't sit still long enough to concentrate on anything, and nobody was explaining to me the principles of English at school. There was huge gaps missed through the teaching, but there was also huge gaps missed for me because my brain was off wondering about all sorts of other stuff to dissociate from the classroom, which I didn't feel safe in, because I was going to get hit by the teacher if I misbehaved. I think. So in terms of the process there, we spoke to a neuroscientist called Rachel Summers who did a study for us, and she discusses the overlap between trauma behaviors, ADHD, and autistic behaviors as well. So that's kind of like compartmentalize that off into one separate section. The connection part obviously brings about the healing as well. Is in one of your videos you talked about every person has maybe 5 or 6 spaces. So if you said like egg cups, you can put one person in each egg cup, but once you get past a certain limit, you can't possibly have safe connection with more people.
Right.
And then if you look outwardly, a lot of the people that end up committing suicide and things like this, or having the self-harming tendencies, they have a huge circle of friends with a very shallow connection.
Exactly.
I don't know if you can speak about that a little bit.
So I think what I've seen in working with thousands of clients is that a lot of people think I've got connection, but what they really mean is kind of Western society, bar room, sports team connection, where you feel warm emotionally to the person, but you don't talk more than a centimeter deep on any discussion. You don't open up deeply personal stuff. It's just fun. It's focused on a certain topic or event, and so it's very superficial. So what I do is say that's a level of connection, but it's not the connection we crave for, that we need to be truly healthy. And so that has to get deeper and deeper so I can be totally open and vulnerable, and that I can open up with somebody about everything.
Yeah.
My deepest hurts, my fears, my dreams, my longings, all of those things, I have to be able to work towards that. And so you don't just establish that with somebody in one day. That's a process where you start with that very superficial, but you build deeper and deeper. And so that's the kind of connection that we all long for. Very few have, but that's what we need to really heal.
That it just through something you said there, my brain went off on a tangent again with this thing about healing ourselves, and then the instant reaction is people want to run back and help the ones they love. So something we're thinking about there is, if we go back and we say to these people, oh, here's something that's going to heal you and it's going to help you develop, when they don't want to, it almost reconfirms the trauma, because you're trying to connect and you're saying this is something we could connect over. So then there's another form of rejection in that. But what I found, so anybody who's manipulative, they don't respect the people they're manipulating, because they put themselves above them.
Right.
And so say for example, somebody with really narcissistic tendencies, they're manipulating people below them. They don't respect them. They're using them there. If this person goes, okay, I'm not having this anymore, they walk off, they heal themselves, and they become, whether it be a formidable opponent or just somebody that's got a very strong backbone, they've learned who they are, the other person can't help but eventually respect them.
Right.
And they notice.
Right.
And that's what wins. And like my mum and me, we've had some huge rows where at first family members were like, how can you be saying this about your mum? How can you do it? And I said, just trust me, it will work. We moved it forwards, and my mum is now going through your program as well. So for me, there's been a huge amount of growth by going through the process, by coming out the other side. And like, as a child, you always want the respect from your family. And when I say respect, I mean the love, the kindness, the care. The respect covers a lot of things, a way a human being should be treated. And what I've finally got is that, by stepping out from underneath the manipulation and the tactics that the family use sometimes. And yeah, so without that, you're going to be stuck in the position where you never get the respect you want, and the only way to do it is to become the person. So there was a meme on the internet, and it said people with trauma often become the person they needed when they were a child.
Yeah.
And then I'm like, well, with the extreme lengths of the people that I'm connected to, so people like Michael Venom Page, myself, so Michael's 10 times world kickboxing champion, I'm 7 times world kickboxing champion. To have to go through those extreme lengths in order to come out the other side, it's not an easy journey, but you don't have to go to those lengths, but we did in order to realize who we are ourselves, kind of thing. But is there an easy way? Is it always the hard way, or is there somewhere where you can walk, like the Buddhists say, in the middle path?
Right. So, such a good question. To me, the bottom line is there's no magic fix. You have to go through reprocessing the trauma. So there, often it's going to feel worse before it feels better. So there's going to be an element of pain. There's not only is there not an easy fix, there's not a quick fix. This is you're entering a lengthy process of working through not just the healing the wounds, but relearning life with healthy tools. And so that takes a lot of time and hard work, and because you're rewiring your brain and getting new brain circuits, and that takes practice. You got to do it over and over again until the brain learns these new tools and they become natural to it. And so what I tell people is the first 3 to 6 months is when it feels like work. After that, it's still work, but it's enjoyable too, and it's not constant work, because it's like riding a bike. You can start to do it more out of your subconscious. Then you got to concentrate fiercely on every little step. But we all would love to find a quick, easy fix, magic, just not possible. And so the danger because we have that longing, is a lot of people are wanting to get into like psychedelics or some like EMDR, and I love EMDR, but they're hoping it'll be a magic fix. And so to me, what I've seen with people that have tried those things is they will get a quick little benefit from it. But if they don't deal with the underlying shame, if they don't deal with the underlying wounds, within a few months, they're back down to where they were. And so that, what they hoped would be a quick fix, gave them a little bit of relief. But if they don't deal with the underlying issues, it's not going to
make the changes. So it's interesting. One of my other coaches is an amazing guy, Ido Portal. So he talks about the law of Weber-Fechner, where the body has a capacity to perceive change, but only after a certain amount. So if there's not enough change in tension, you don't notice it's there. And I would explain it as if you haven't seen a friend for a while who's been on a diet, you notice a huge amount of weight change in that person. You say, wow, you've lost a lot of weight, you're doing really well, or lost a lot of body fat. Then same for somebody who's putting on muscle. You notice it if you haven't seen them for a few months, but their family won't notice the changes at all until it's accumulative, because they're seeing them all the time. And the good news that I found with the courses, with the development, you don't have to wait till the process is finished for you to reap the benefits of it. So very quickly, if you're walking around and you're running on 20% battery, 22% feels a lot better than 20%, so that you notice these amazing changes, like you said, within a very short space of 3 to 6 months of the hard work. But this is where I think the martial arts practice can maybe meet it somewhere, because we've come through a process where we do the hard work, so we don't mind doing the practice. And in actual fact, for me now, my life's become a practice. It's like every day I say, well, what amount of time have I got? What can I do with the time? But also physically, how am I feeling? How are my thoughts on a day-to-day basis about everybody else and myself, and my emotions? And like you said, I think in the talk that we did last night, we said have a check in the morning, have a check in the afternoon, and keep checking in with yourself. And the awareness builds, and it's made a massive change in my life, which I'd like to thank you personally for that as well. But yeah, so in terms of having a safe team, a safe set of people, what would you like to try to achieve with what you're doing with your work all around the world at the moment? Have you got an end goal or an end result of it?
Well, what we're finding is everybody learns differently, and um, most people want to grow, most people want community, but fear still becomes such a inhibiting factor for people. So I want community and growth, but I don't want to face my fear of connecting, of putting myself out there, of doing things differently. And so they got to face fear. So, but what we're finding is what helps people do that is different for people. So some, a course is what they need, other just a seminar gets them on the right track, other watching a video gets them on the right track. So we're just wanting to continue to kind of provide various ways that people can be exposed to the information. But then the second piece is we don't want to just help adults who've grown up with complex trauma, lived with all the unhealthy ways, and now are saying, I got to change. We'd love to help those adults be better parents so that they're not, their kids aren't going to go through the trauma. And we would like to reach people at an earlier age, like in their teen years, so they're beginning to understand some of this stuff so that they're not going to end up making the mistakes that their parents did. So it's trying to push it down to earlier ages and then to parenting so that we can really see some massive changes in the next generation.
Yeah, builds up, which I think we're getting there slowly, aren't we? With
Exactly.
that, with the people we've been speaking to recently. I'd like to say thanks for spending the time talking to us today.
Thank you.
And we'll definitely get you back. I think we're planning to bring Tim back in March next year, so we'll definitely see if we can film another episode in the podcast. But thanks for your time today, and I wish you all the best.
Thank you very much.
Nice one. Cheers, Tim. So I've watched the podcast back again. I've listened to it. I've tried to take it on board. The 3 key points there that were really important is the need for safety, the ability to process emotions and traumatic experiences from a safe space or a safe place within the body. So we need to learn to regulate that nervous system, and then to actually have safe people to connect with. This is the goal. The way you do that and the way you get there is going to be different because everybody's starting point is always different. Life is hard, so it throws us curveballs. It surprises us just when we think everything's fine. A catastrophe happens within the family. It could be a loss, it could be grief, and we have to learn to process these. It reiterates to me why I called this podcast The Real Work, because life is going to be hard anyway. So if you choose to do hard things and you build resilience through the practice of doing those hard things, then you get to at least choose your hard. So if we do the hard things, it makes it worthwhile. If the hard things happen to us, we go through them anyway, but it ends up being worthless. We don't learn from it. We don't adapt. We don't grow. We don't evolve. So I think it's really important that you choose which type of hard you want to take on, which type of hard you want to force through, and you're doing it in a way that's comfortable for you eventually. So this is really important. I want to say thanks to Tim again for his massive wealth of knowledge that he's passing on to people all over the world. You can find Tim on YouTube, Tim Fletcher, C-PTSD or complex trauma. His website again is www.timfletcher.ca. We've got links to his website in the video as well underneath. So check out the comments. Thanks to Tom Berry from MK Motors and the guys down there for helping us get the studio ready in the back of the van, which is awesome. And hopefully we'll be back for another episode with another exciting guest really soon. Thank you to you guys for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe and share it with your friends. Thanks very much. Take care.